Hi, everyone. Welcome to Catalyst Energies. My name is Dee. Thank you for joining me. I am so grateful that you are here. I'm so grateful that I'm here. We made it. New moon forecast. 2 days late, but I assure you, no dollars short. So, this is the new moon forecast for the Cancer rising, Cancer sun, Cancer moon folks. Anybody with strong Cancer, there's going to be relevance here. In fact, there is a specific chart that is very timely in terms of this new moon that we're going to take a brief look at the end here, just as a teachable moment, as a reference point to show how much astrology is woven into the macro in terms of activities, of behaviors, things putting into action. So we'll talk about that at the end, because I really do want to focus here on the new moon forecast for the Cancer identified folk. So primarily Cancer rising. We're going to look at a Cancer rising chart, which is what we're looking at here, but also Cancer moon, especially because the moon is the ruling body of the sign of Cancer. If you are a Cancer moon, you're really feeling the lunations, either new moon or opposite of this time of year. The full moon in Cancer, the Cancer people are going to feel these lunations a lot stronger. And I have seen a lot of Cancer moon people in the last 2 weeks or so leading up to this point. So I do feel like that there is a lot of potency, reverberation, sensitivity for the Cancer identified people. And even since the solstice, wow, I feel like that it's been pretty intense just in general. So full disclosure, I don't have a lot of Cancer in my natal chart. It is my sixth house as an Aquarius rising person. So I am having my own host of issues in terms of that sixth house energy. So anybody with an Aquarius rising, Cancer is the house where you get your shit together. So that's been very interesting all on its own. So we're going to look up to the full moon, which is going to be in Aquarius on August 1st, and we're going to look at the main themes leading up to that point. Spend a little bit of time talking about the degree of the new moon, what a new moon really represents, and then go through the next 2 weeks of the chart. What I'd really like to focus, though, is more on the Leo energy, because this is the second house for Cancer. The sun's going to come into Leo. Venus is going to station retrograde this week in Leo. Mercury is chugging along in Leo, and Black Moon Lilith is here in Leo. And Black Moon Lilith is the lunar apogee. So there's a connection there with the moon as well. It's the dark feminine. So all of this energy in Leo is the second house for Cancer rising. This is the objective world. These are inherent assets. So I'm going to spend some time here because it is really in this axis of power of the second and eighth house that will become the focal point at the full moon, because the full moon in Aquarius will be in the eighth house for the Cancer rising folks. So that's where I want to put the focus. That, in fact, is where all the inner planets and the personalized planets, including the sun and the moon, are situated in the second house. As you can see here, the outer planets are all sitting at the top of the chart for the Cancer rising person. And by the time we even get to the equinox, everything up here, including Chiron, which is not a planet, it's a comet asteroid, everything here is going to be retrograde. And so internalized, pulling in magnetic energy of these large transpersonal planets, these outer planets that affect more than the individual personal experience. They are the collective experiences brought into the social framework of the Cancer person, but they're all going to be retrograde. And so that suggests to me that right now, especially with a new moon, but even the situation of all this Leo energy with Venus in her retrograde soon, Mercury here, and then the sun coming into its home territory of Leo in the second house, the energy here is really on the individual and what is at your disposal, what is objectively yours, right? And that second house covers a large territory of stuff, right? And it is stuff. It's usually fixed earth. So we're going to focus there, as well as the culmination, as I said, is coming into the eighth house, where it is not inherent power. It is what do we create and generate together, right? And so this is how we do business is in the eighth house. Sexual energy that's generated is in the eighth house. The occult practices are in the eighth house. any type of business relationship, any type of banking, right? That's in the eighth house. Really, what it comes down to is sex, death, and taxes, right? Sex, power, money, and death, right? And also death of the ego. The dark night of the soul is often felt in that eighth house. And I would say with a full moon coming, there's going to be a very strong mirror image of the Cancer person in terms of power dynamics come this full moon. And so having a sense of containment in one's identity as a Cancer identified person, I feel like is going to be very, very important, because what I anticipate here is a very strong destruction process, right? Something that's going to be forced upon the Cancer person that is out of all of our controls, and that's going to be the sun opposite Pluto. But for the Cancer person in particular, it's going to be out of the control of you, and your identity is changing, whether you like it or not. And that's a function of Pluto having been in the opposite of your sign, so in Capricorn, since 2008. It's finishing here, right? Capricorn, or Pluto in Capricorn is going to finish by the time we get to February 2024. So we're in the last phases. We're in the tail end. We're in the cleanup mode of Pluto in Capricorn. So for the Cancer person, this is who you are in your relationships, right? The form of your relationships is the seventh house. And so this is any personal, professional, interpersonal relationships. It is the form of the relationship and the person that is brought forward when you're in relationships. So it's often in our relationships, whatever they are, that bring out the opposition to our identity, which is experienced and projected from the first house. So Cancer people, the forest of relationship land has been burning down for years and years and years. And it depends on where Cancer is in your chart, where your first house cusp is, all of that stuff. And that's why it's important to understand your own chart and to get a personalized reading so you understand exactly what's going on. But as a general theme here, relationship land is changing. You in relationship is changing, Cancer. And it's like the forest is burning down. So the important thing to focus on here in this new moon, which is unconscious, it's spontaneous, it's impulsive. The new moons are beginnings in the darkness, which is something that the Cancer people are very familiar with, right? This is the root system embedding itself in the soil. So it's not like the Cancer people are unfamiliar with what it's like to feel around in the darkness, because that's kind of the nature of it, right? You're kind of closing in and insulating, protecting and nourishing, just like a womb, right? But the thing about a womb that it's different than Capricorn is that there's room to grow inside, unless you're on the dark side of Cancer, which is like Munchausen syndrome and like being so insular and so protective that there is no room to grow. It's stifled, right? So the realm of relationship land is been burning down. The forest is burning down, right? But the root system of everything that has been part of that ecosystem is what determines how and to what extent the forest will grow back. And this new moon is really asking of us all, but for the Cancer people entirely, because this is your identity in the world, you know, that system, your root system, the person who you are, which is nourishing, which is protective, which is insular, which is committed and loyal, right, is intact and is consolidated. And in fact, that you put forward your own willful endeavors to create that space in which new growth of who you are can happen, right? You're changing whether you like it or not, because relationship land is changing. And in fact, when the sun is opposite Pluto and creates the grand square that we're going to look at over the weekend, you kind of can't get out of it. None of us can. But for the Cancer people, maybe instead of being hyper fixated, if you are, or having a hard time letting go of who you are in relationship, who you've been in relationship, which is dependable, which is responsible, all of these, and unyielding. That's the other thing about Capricorn: unyielding, restrictive, dependable, responsible. It's very paternal. Perhaps it's time to start applying that nurturing, caring, protective energy towards yourself. right? The self-care that is not like, I'm going to pamper myself. It's really, I'm going to focus here on creating that framework around my sense of self so that I am not destroyed down to my root system when the full destructive energy through Pluto and Capricorn is just destroying who I've been in relationships, right? So again, it's unique to everybody because everybody's chart is like a unique fingerprint. So that's important to understand. But the general theme here is that Cancer, take advantage of this new moon right now in order to set an intention to create that space within yourself that you, and it's not so much you have to take the burden of it. That's the other thing about Cancer people. I feel like there's this sense of really taking the burden. Of course, anybody who is a mother or is just very maternal in their lives will often take that burden because that's kind of the Capricorn energy, is that this is the institutional framework of what is, right? So it's social welfare, an extended family, and an industry, the government, the economy as a whole. Whatever these institutions are, oftentimes Cancer people will become kind of the boss in their relationships, and that is even with Pluto. Pluto has the final word and has just been destroying this. So maybe allow yourself to, I don't want to say embrace whatever thing that is coming through, but embrace the challenge and embrace the ability as a Cancer identified person to nourish and protect yourself and your sense of who you are, so that when the nature of who you've been in relationship is going through massive change and destruction, you yourself, your root system is not compromised and new growth is possible, right? And it's not just you. You're creating a space in order for God to enter your life, in order for the Pentecostal descent, the Holy Spirit, right? The divine source entering your experience, because it's not just about us and our egos. It is truly about creating a relationship with the Great Spirit. And when we do that, we allow that influence. So we talked previously in the other weekly reports about Mars crossing Regulus, Archangel Raphael. So those are things about healing and blessings and miracles. Venus is just bumping up against Regulus and is stationing retrograde during this time. So we actually really want to focus on the 2nd and 8th house, because that full moon for the Cancer people in the 8th house is about the power dynamics in your relationships, and it's going to illuminate a lot. It is going to be like a magic mirror about who you think you've been, and giving a reality check for all of us. Ooh, I really felt that, and I think it's going to be for all of us. But for the Cancer people, it's going to be in that area where, if you remember in the Never-Ending Story, I'm totally dating myself here, but if you remember the scene where he goes through all the Atreyu goes through all the archways, when he gets to the very end and he sees himself in the mirror, which is Bastion, and that most people run away screaming when they have to look at their true self, and Atreyu shows his courage and bravery by walking through the mirror. This is going to be big for the Cancer people, because not only is the destructive energy of Pluto opposite the Sun something that's out of your control, something that you can't control, something that may feel very unfair to you, or that you are just having a very difficult time with in terms of your identity and how you identify yourself. If you have the courage to really look in that mirror when that full moon comes, there's going to be huge breakthroughs here, right? And seeing things for what they truly are, rather than projecting things onto people and being projected upon. That's the other thing as well. So Cancer, you have a really, you have a difficult road ahead of you. And I think it already started with the solstice and it's just gotten that much more intense. But the thing is that your root system and the identity of a Cancer person is really working in your favor in terms of allowing new growth within yourself. But that full moon is going to show a lot. And like I said, it's going to be a magic mirror. It's going to reflect something back that is reality. It's going to be a huge reality check rather than what it will be is showing all of us, but you in particular, how the power dynamics in your relationships, what they really have been, right? Without any illusion. I think that that's something to be very aware of. But we are going to focus a lot on this second house for you because this is where all the inner planets are and the sun and the moon, which is the second house. So Venus is here. She's already happy in the second house. She gets very possessive here because she's like, this is mine. And when we're talking about Leo, we're talking about our creative expression, our authenticity, our voice. This is your asset. Cancer, your bloom, the blossoming of who you are is the asset. It is inherently valuable. And as the sun comes into its home territory of Leo, coming into the second house, sometimes when the sun is in the second house, sometimes we become over-identified with what we have as opposed to who we are. And that's just something to be aware of because as Venus comes into her retrograde, she's going to get even more possessive. She's going to get even more magnetic in terms of the pulling in of what she identifies as hers. And Venus is about embodiment. It's about what we feel with our senses. And the second house is what is inherently valuable. So this covers a lot of territory here. Second house is resources, material possessions, what type of wealth we've inherited or have access to. It's the objective world that we are part of. It also represents the body. And so by extension represents the biofield because it is a body part, just like every other body part. So it's the fixed nature of what is, right, in terms of our body. It represents our DNA, our genetics, our habits, the traditions, the collective energies that we were born into, natural resources, telluric energy of the planet. These all fit into the second house. So for the Cancer person, though, it is the resonance from your heart. It is your joy and your authenticity and your voice that is your asset, right? So this has a huge amount of influence on what is generated in relationships. So when we get to the first quarter moon in Scorpio, it's going to be in your fifth house, right? And the South Node has been here for a while and is now just moved into your fourth house, which is your house. The Cancer house is the fourth house. And so it's going to be interesting because the South Node is here and it's going to kind of, for the Cancer people, really have you defaulting back into a place of personal power, of private life, of what's going on internally, and to remember that the South Node is the momentum to push you at a soul level towards where you're going, which for the Cancer people is your career, right? It's your mission. It's your contribution to society. And it has been a huge sticking point with Chiron here. Now, Chiron's going to retrograde as well during this period of time that we're covering, along with Venus. And so that feels to me, Chiron stationing retrograde over the next number of months is an opportunity to really start addressing those types of wounds because, and to prove yourself to yourself, right? Especially because the North Node of the moon is now coming into Aries, into the 10th house. Cancer people have to be willing to prove themselves to themselves instead of proving themselves in terms of your career, your mission, the zenith of your destiny. Because, and it's kind of, again, there's so much, I don't want to say not choice, but this is also part of the grand square that we're going to see is the nodes of the moon, right? These are unconscious drives of the soul that are pulling us in a direction. And it's very easy for the Cancer person to kind of default back into that fourth house of the inner life, the private life, the personal life, where your power comes from, home, family, spiritual community, a sense of personal identity, integration, self-esteem, character. And it's important to realize that there's some value, obviously, to the South Node here, but it's meant to propel you into your career. This is where the Cancer person truly experiences their freedom in Aries. Their inherent freedom, their inherent value and potency and desire is in where their power is released, right? And Chiron's been a big, like I said, it's been a big thorn in the side for the Cancer people for a long time. We're coming up to not only a Chiron return for the U.S. natal chart, but the natal chart of the U.S. is very heavy in Cancer. So you're also going to be kind of over-identified with the macro as a whole, Cancer. So, no pressure. No pressure at all, especially if you're going through a Chiron return right now, which means that Chiron is returning to the place it was when you were born. You are very woven into what's happening at the macro level right now. So, but the power dynamics is really where we want to focus, because that's going to be the culminating point. And those start with subjective identity and who you are in relationship as well. So be prepared, Cancer. So much of how you've identified yourself in terms of society, social relationship, who you are in relationship. Not only are all these outer planets going to be retrograde and Chiron very soon, bringing this transpersonal outer planet energy into a much more internalized, and I don't want to say backwards, but it's definitely internalized magnetic quality in terms of your social expression and identity. And it's definitely changing. It's going through its own review period in many ways. It's here in the individual identity and expression. And specifically, what is your asset, right? What is the inherent value and resource and materiality that is at your disposal? And it's your voice, right? It's the blossoming of your nature. It is the flowering that the root system of the plant is able to support. Just like the root system of your identity and who you are as a Cancer person supports the release of this incredible, potent passion and joy and authenticity, right? Leo doesn't have to be just experienced as the joy and passion and laughter. Authenticity means expressing your feelings, right? And if they are sorrow and grief and tears, that's also authentic. Whatever it is really the divine essence moving through you and you as a mouthpiece. That is the best and the highest form of Leo, right? The heart of the lion is those last degrees of Leo into Virgo. So let's kind of look here at just the general transits here over the week ahead, just so that we can see and the day by day, so that you can kind of plan ahead, Cancer, and be like, oh, okay, this day is going to be when things maybe erupt in my life. So this is the new moon, as we talked about, 25 degrees of Cancer. So the Sabian symbol for 25 Cancer is a willful man. Basically creates a space, creates structures that allow spiritual energies or divine providence to enter. And that allows for an uncommon endowment, an inner strength that comes from more than just you. Just like the plant, the root system is embedded, but it's the divine spark that allows for new growth, right? So you have to create that space. And of course, the new moon is, like I said, it's instinctive, it's youthful, it's unconscious, right? There's not a lot of distinguishing between the inner and outer in the new moon. So you just kind of let it sit for a minute. When we get to more of the crescent moon, which I'm going to point out as we go along, this is where you start to become more aware of the objective resistance. And that's going to be a specific moment throughout the weekend, then leading into our first quarter moon, which is going to be in Scorpio. And this is always some sort of actional crisis of what do I do, right? Because it's one thing to be identified with this, whatever your asset is. It's another to be very emotionally moved to express yourself in terms of, whatever it is. And we'll get there. So let's see, one day at a time. So this is the new moon was on the 17th. We come into the 18th here. as well, and the moon moves into Leo. So even in the last day and even into today, the moon, which is your ruling body, Cancer, is moving through the second house. It's giving you a sense of emotional preview and sensitivity about what is this asset, right? It's meeting Mercury. It's going to meet Venus as well, meet Black Moon Lilith. So it's going to allow a very personal connection and adaptation emotionally to the process of Mercury, which is our cognition, and basically traveling along the beam of light and the speed of light through our thoughts and our communication. And in the second house, it's really using this as an asset, but also using the mental faculties to problem solve, to address material issues. So there's going to be a bit of a emotional connection to all of this energy of what is inherently yours to release into the world, to invest into something cooperative, and becoming more aware of it. So when we come into the 19th, which is today, you start to see a couple transits that are becoming that are coming into view. So one of them is that Mars, which is in your third house right now. So Mars in the third house is very dynamic, really pushing into new mental territory, really active and action-oriented and projecting in terms of identity, in terms of your situation, and not so much assessing, but acting on working, essentially. It's mental work here with Mars in Virgo in your third house. And that mental work may be analysis. It may be organizing your thoughts. It may be organizing your immediate reality. It may be organizing or purifying or being very disciplined mentally. And the action is coming through that. So now, when we look at the axis here of this opposition of Mars and Saturn, right? Saturn in its retrograde in the ninth house. We're talking about what you know, what is right in front of you, what you are mentally engaging with, and the ninth house, which is what you believe, right? What is the overall meaning and the purpose? And of course, Saturn in the ninth house is very strict about all of the blocks that are, all of the threads have to be meticulously organized and woven together in a very specific format in terms of social meaning and purpose and belief system, right? The ninth house is about the big picture, and that often comes through understanding. That comes through synthesis. This is where the transmutation of the relationship and the power dynamics in the relationship and that raw power becomes a social purpose. It becomes meaningful. And Saturn it's not that there's no meaning with Saturn. Of course there's meaning with Saturn, but it needs to be very organized, and every single thread is kind of put through its process of inspection, right? Especially in this retrograde. It's getting very dense and heavy here. So Mars opposite Saturn, there's a couple general feels here with Mars opposite Saturn about what you know and what you understand. And oftentimes this is a very frustrating, very disappointing type of transit, and there's a lot of anger because Mars is pulling against something that is unyielding, which is Saturn, especially in the retrograde, because it's something that is embedded deeply within us now and deeply within your understanding. And so Mars is frustrated because there may be literal people standing in your way in your immediate environment. There may be mental blocks that you're trying to really work through, and Saturn is just like, this is the overall understanding here, and no matter how you are trying to mentally organize things, there is something so deeply situated in this area that you're not just going to think your way out of it. And the disappointment can come from unfulfilled desires, which is what Mars is always acting on, is our desire, our inherent desire to be. So the resulting outrage is challenging to express and requires a lot of patience and self-discipline. Cancer, I would say here that, there's a lot of challenge coming. So as much as you are attempting to push through these mental blocks, there's going to be a lot of frustration because the overall purpose of things is going to be very firmly planted like a piece of rebar in the ground down, but it has to do with the social meaning and purpose of what is happening in relationship land. So even if you don't have any adversaries, you can be your own worst enemy in this situation, okay? It's a low energy, it's a slow energy, it's weak, right? Remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So Mars is trying to sprint through the mental aspects of things, working and working and working, and you feel like you may not be getting anywhere in terms of understanding, okay? So just be easy on yourself. Realize that this is here, and you have to show patience and determination and discipline, right? If you need a place for that work to go, sharpen your knives, but don't use them. Because Saturn over in your ninth house is like, we're not done yet with every single piece that needs to be woven together into a new tapestry of meaning and purpose, right? And that's part of this retrograde with Saturn, is that there is stuff to go over, right? That there is a deeper aspect of understanding that is not yielding right now. It doesn't matter what Mars wants to do. So again, put that work towards discipline and patience. Sharpen your knives. If you're doing something that works for you, keep doing it. You don't have to go on the offensive, even if you're angry, because that's what people will try to do, and they'll just end up hurting themselves. And in this case, right in front of you. Third house is your situation. It's your environment. So the people you communicate with every day, the people that you interact with on a regular basis, your back and forth of data, of travel, of communication. You don't want to sprint, when you know that you got to do that full mile, right? It is about maintaining that output, right? Because there's work to be done here. Now, this is also a huge Draco activation because Mars is conjunct Alpha Draconis. And so it's important to realize that if you can't show any restraint here, or you find yourself kind of struggling towards something, and you may kind of give into lesser values, in order to fulfill what you feel like is your desire, right? And instead, maybe you have some restraint. Maybe you have courage. And instead of getting caught up in anger and disappointment at your limitation, maybe you kind of embrace it in order to re-grasp that energy in another way, in a greater way, right? And so you don't have to keep actively pushing, right? And so this opposition is going to really bring this out. And again, for the Cancer people, it's going to be what you know, and what you're interacting with mentally right in front of you, and what the big picture is. And Saturn is sitting in the big picture and is retrograde, and it's like, no, this is it, right? Doesn't matter, like I said, how much you try to fight your way out of this plastic bag here. You're not going to get anywhere, and really you're just going to end up hurting yourself. So maybe there's something here about withdrawing in some ways and just kind of sitting back and doing what you've been doing in terms of sharpening those knives, having that steely determination, and just accepting the fact that your conscience is very much holding firm in terms of the larger picture here. It may not be as apparent right now because of the retrograde, but it's still very much here. Now, the other thing about this is that the sun in Cancer also is going to, as you can see here, is coming into a trine with Neptune, which is in the same sign as Saturn, in the same house, and is now retrograde. So there is an overall spiritual transcendent experience of everything you need is provided. It's here for you in terms of the big picture, right? The full picture of abstraction, right? The entire mosaic is here. And the fog is clearing now in terms of the spiritual aspect of this, in terms of what God is providing, right? Or what the other side of this retrograde of Neptune is, the willful ignorance and people continuing to just basically give in to the delusion, right? So let's just assume that's not happening here, and that everybody listening to this video is really invested in a clear vision of what the divine is providing, and that everything we need in terms of big picture is truly here. It's mutable. It is vast. It is broad spectrum with Neptune and Pisces, but it's the ocean of consciousness. But at least now the fog is cleared and we can see a bit more of what is actually here and where maybe we have been misled. There has been misunderstanding. So the sun in Cancer, in your sign, in a trine to Neptune here at the same time, coming into today, basically. Tomorrow, well, today is the 19th, coming into the 20th. At the same time that Mars is opposite Saturn, we do have this ability for all of us and Cancer, for you to have a more profound and broad understanding of your place in the world. Importantly, you may realize that achieving your goals and dreams is of prime importance before you can be of help to others. Interesting. Didn't we just basically say, Cancer people, you need to apply that normal, nurturing, protective, insular, maternal, protective energy towards yourself right now. And even though there is challenge, there is also this ability to stay true to your spiritual ideals without sacrificing anything, really. Your ego, especially the sun in your sign, Cancer, benefits from a more spiritual outlook, right? In terms of the larger process and broader perspective of meaning and purpose of relationship, even if those relationships and the nature of them has been going through such overhaul. This is one of those transits that you're like, oh, I can actually identify with the much bigger picture, and my sense of self is actually identified in a broader and more profound way with this whole process. So your path to success can be helped by your uplifting self-belief, right? And you become more sensitive to your environment. You become more empathic with other people. So this is really good for you in terms of your identity and the type of relationships and bonding that you could be engaged with. But it also, I feel like in particular for the Cancer people, it is really about a broader and profound understanding of you, your place in the world, how you can identify with this inner rebirth of who you are in relation to the overall picture of the divine essence, which is Neptune in Pisces, right? The problem with Neptune in Pisces is the always the possibility of getting lost in the bardo, and the retrograde is kind of a saving grace right now for people to see things very clearly. Other people, like I said, are going to they're going to double down. They're willfully ignorant. They're not seeing things for what they are, and they're continuing to engage in the fantasy and illusion of where they've been, and that's on them, right? For you Cancer people, you can experience this inner rebirth in some ways of your identity in connection to all of this, because you have this more broad understanding of your place in the world and achieving your goals, okay? So this is on the 20th, which is just a hot button day on so many levels, right? This is when the CME from that very large duration flare is set to hit, is on the 20th. So it's going to be quite the weekend. I'm not going to lie. And with this Mars opposite Saturn, it also is going to be very, very challenging. So when we come into the 21st, the moon does come into Virgo, and your ability to pick up on those patterns intuitively, subconsciously, maybe pick up on patterns that normally the mind would miss, right? Because it's very much in its logic. We're talking about the emotions and the subtlety of the moon coming through the third house. So that's going to be picking up on the same aspect of Saturn and Mars, because the moon is going to be opposite Saturn and the moon is going to conjunct Mars. So you yourself, Cancer, as this happens on the 21st, which I believe is Friday, when this is happening, this is going to amplify those moon opposite Saturn feels, which makes you sad and lonely, disconnected, and feeling sorry for yourself, right? Guilt tripping other people, moping. And with the moon conjunct Mars, this can have the overlay of impulsiveness and impatience, and you can become very irritable and agitated and mean and rude and violent. So be aware of this, Cancer, because the moon is representing you. And so as you are feeling sad and lonely, feeling depressed, feeling disconnected, feeling like you're moping, and then you have the added energy of Mars, which is impulsive and impatient, and you become very angry and agitated and try to take it out on other people, right? The best thing you can do here is stand up for yourself, stand up for a cause you care about, right? There's courage and enthusiasm with the moon and Mars, but there's an initiative to act on your desires, but you have to be aware of everything else surrounding it. Now, thankfully, the moon is then going to come into right after that is going to come into a trine with Jupiter. And I think this is going to be one of those moments where you kind of pull it together emotionally and realize that there is a baggage that societally that we all have to carry. But for the Cancer person with Jupiter in the 11th house, there is a baggage that needs to be carried when we decide that we want something, whatever it is. We're talking about Taurus, we're talking about fixed earth, we're talking about resources and material aspects. And so, yes, there's a heavy baggage to carry, but it's something that we can carry with a sense of emotional growth, self-understanding. You may find yourself needing to share your feelings. You may be the person that people are coming to in order to kind of unload their burden. And that I feel like is going to be especially for the Cancer people with the moon in your 3rd house. I feel like you may be that emotional support person in the people in your life, and to help people societally carry their burden, to stand in that position. So it's going to be difficult because then the sun comes into that opposition with Pluto. And like I talked about, this is a grand square with the nodes of the moon, right? This is a box that nobody gets out of. And for sun opposite Pluto, it's a crisis, right? And for the Cancer people, it's definitely a crisis of identity and self-esteem. So this could be self-destructive character traits that come out, like addiction or spying or stubbornness. It also comes out in relationships, being manipulative and jealous and dominating. And again, spying keeps coming up with sun opposite Pluto. So events may include the breakdown of actual things, but considering that this is sun opposite Pluto, 1st and 7th, this is going to come right into the essence of who you are and who you are in relationship. So there are things that are going to occur that are going to feel outside of your control, okay? But in a way, it helps you realize that you don't need control over others or your environment, right? You may experience a bruised ego, but that's kind of okay. Who doesn't have that at times, right? There's a real great potential for this grand square, but you have to be very aware of how powerful and how trapped you may feel. We're all going to feel it, right? So this change may be forced upon all of us, and it probably will be. So the aim is to transform for the better, to get out ahead of it, to evolve, to, not participate in those types of spycraft or manipulation or self-destructive behavior in order to feel like you're empowered, right? The empowerment comes from you, and it comes from what is inherently yours, and that is ordained and given to you as a result of being a child of God, part of the Great Spirit, right? One with divine source. So maybe you'll experience a bruised ego, maybe it'll be a little bit worse, especially because of this grand square. Like I said, this is a box that nobody gets out of. The only way out is through. And the North Node, in the same position as that April solar eclipse, go back to that. This is a callback here, letting us know here that the aim of the soul right now and where it's being pulled is in the direction of what is your contribution societally? What is your mission? What is the zenith of your destiny, right? And it may be in these destructive types of events that go to the core of who you are as a person. And to realize that there's a lot of power at a soul level in terms of your own personal power, where you feel vulnerable and safe, but also where you feel connected and loyal, and allow that to release into what your contribution is, your career, the zenith of your destiny, which is the 10th house, okay? There's no getting around it. The North Node and Chiron will come into a conjunction in this 10th house, and your real freedom is here. right? The real freedom is in how you contribute and to what structures you are contributing to. That is Aries in the 10th house. So, and of course, this is where Mars rules. So the work that Mars is doing down here in the 3rd house has a place, right? It's in that mission or that destiny or in the release of the power. If the 4th house is the individual root system of a person, the 10th house is the entire ecosystem. That's where the power is released into and creating. So, oh, geez, Cancer. It's going to be very difficult for all of us, but it is really going to affect your identity big time. So we come into the 22nd, and this is when Venus comes into her retrograde. And like I said, she's already possessive in the 2nd house of like, this is mine, right? Just like in that scene from A Christmas Story when the younger brother, it's not Ralphie, I forget what the younger brother's name is. Right? And so they're opening everything. This is mine, right? Venus is already like this in the 2nd house, but she's really going to be like this when she's retrograde. She's going to pull in. She's going to get really possessive. And in fact, she is not going to want to share at all. Right? Not at all in terms of assets and in terms of voice. And you may feel that. You may feel like, you know what? I'm pulling this in. I'm pulling in my biofield. I'm pulling in my resources. I'm pulling my voice in. I am not sharing anymore. Just be aware of that as one of the dynamics of Venus retrograde in the 2nd house, okay? And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. There is something that really is yearning for conscious solidity here in terms of our heart, right? And our expression. And it's not quite there yet. And this retrograde is, for the Cancer person, I think, going to pull that resource in and be very possessive over it. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with that. You just have to be aware of that so that you don't find yourself like so insular and so pulled in and so possessive over your voice that you're not sharing, because if you don't share, you can't find the freedom in the zenith of your destiny. You understand? So this all comes back to this full moon culminating in the 8th house, which is shared resources, right? But it starts here in the 2nd house. So the sun also enters Leo on the 22nd into the 23rd. So it's going to get very interesting as Venus and the embodiment, our sensitivity to the world and the earth around us comes in. And then the sun in Leo is like, I am identified with this place. I am shining. I am sustained by this resource. And maybe there is a sense of being more magnetic and pulling in, and maybe it's pulling in even more of that which is your joy and your authenticity. But then the sun is going to be shining in this house. And like I said earlier, sometimes when the sun comes into the 2nd house, we become over-identified with what we have as opposed to being identified with who we are. So just be mindful of that as well, is that your voice and what you release in terms of that creative, passionate, exuberant expression, right? That feeling intuition rising from the unconscious really wants to take a conscious thought and form. And you become identified with that, right? And so just to be aware that you are not that, you are you. And the Leo energy, your heart and your authentic voice, is that which is released into the world and ultimately is what you invest into sharing. So it's going to be very interesting, to say the least. So the 23rd, the moon is still in Virgo, but then it moves into Libra. And this is where Chiron stations retrograde, as you can see here. And this is also where Mercury comes into a square with Uranus. Now, Uranus is in the 11th house too for the Cancer rising people. And so the landscape of society as a whole has continued to shift with Uranus here. And this square to Mercury is, your mind and your individual mind, your consciousness, your mental faculties, all being focused on and utilized as a resource is one thing. But the higher mind, right? The collective consciousness. Uranus being kind of the gateway or the stargate or the wormhole, however you want to think about it, allowing the quantum leap into the quantum, right? Which is Neptune. Neptune in Pisces is the experience of the quantum. So Uranus is the gateway, right? It's the third eye opening. So Mercury, though, is our own consciousness riding the light beam, right? Our own consciousness functioning at the neurological level. When these two are in a square with each other, watch out, because it really, the tempo of life really increases, because these squares force issues, right? Because they create friction and tension at these 90-degree angles. So there's excitement and changes to your daily routine and interactions, but it's likely to cause upset and nervous tension. You may receive upsetting news, right? And this probably has to do most likely with Uranus in the 11th. At a societal level in the 11th house is where the upset is coming, but it's going to be conceptualized in terms of your actual resource and material reality. So there is an increased need for excitement and amusement, and so it makes you very easily distracted and less dependable. But in some cases, where Mercury is, it's going to make it even more essential that we are focusing on what we're doing here in this area, because there are mishaps that are likely in communication, misunderstandings that can lead to arguments. You're more likely to offend other people and be offended under this influence. There could be vital information that's lost here as a result of this. But on the positive side, there's an increased ability to view things from a different perspective. You can have breakthroughs, original ideas. It's really important that you are remaining flexible and open-minded when dealing with an unexpected event, because, you're trying to do something mentally with your resources that is needs a lot of focus, right? You're displaying a skill set that took a lot of time and effort and is like a virtuosity. It's like a woman riding the bareback horse in the circus. That's actually the Sabian symbol of 23 Leo, right? And so you can't afford to be thrown off, right? It could be very dangerous, and Uranus will throw you off, right? And so get back on the horse if you do get thrown off. Maybe be aware of these unexpected changes, but don't allow yourself to be totally thrown off course. That miscommunication, mishaps are very likely here. And this is when Chiron stations retrograde up here in the 10th house. So you don't want to lose sight of what you are doing, because this transit has the potential to really buck you off, right? And it's at societal level. And the 11th house is our hopes and dreams realized, because it is the society that receives the gift of our voice, right? And so maybe we're mentally, well, especially for you, Cancer, maybe mentally and cognitively and through our speech and communication, attempting to display something or project it or just utilize it. And at a societal level, our peers, our networks, our social organizations that we're part of, those who receive the gift of our individual voice, the entire choir, so to speak, right? The church as a group, not as an institution of religion, but the church as, where two or more are gathered in my name, I will be there. The 11th house, which is the Aquarius house, by the way. So just be aware of this. Sunday, kind of like and get thrown off. Be aware of that and be ahead of the curve, right? There's a lot of things here that are going to throw us off, that have the potential to really challenge us all along the way, Cancer. And this is a lot about, what is inherently yours to use and how are you using it? That's the other thing too. How are you using it is going to be a big part of this upcoming first quarter moon. So we're going to take a look at that as well, because that is happening on the 25th. So, which is Tuesday. So there will be a Starseed ministry for those of you who follow the weekly broadcast. There will be a Starseed ministry on Monday. I am going to move those broadcasts to twice a month instead of weekly. It's just not possible for me to continue with my particular workload in person, right? With body work and energy work now, on top of personal readings, on top of the monthly subscribers and the content that I'm creating for those folks in particular, it's not possible for me. And I know it's an anchor for a lot of people, which is why I'm going to keep it on Mondays. It's just going to be every other week. And then those will be the off weeks. And then the weeks that we don't have those are going to be the new and full moon forecast, just like this, right? So there's going to be content every week, but Monday on the 24th, we will have a Starseed ministry, and we'll do a reading, and this will be a lot of information, around this first quarter moon in Scorpio, which is the 5th house for you, Cancer. Now, it's going to be very close to the south node. Okay, so the moon will have moved through the 4th house, and you become very sensitive, very deeply embedded in where your power comes from, your personal life, where you feel safe and secure emotionally. And then moving into the 5th house is, especially the moon, you become very emotionally influenced and expressive in terms of your identity, right? And the issue here is, I think, always with the first quarter moon is an actional crisis, right? What are we going to do? A crisis in relationship. So as we've been moving through the crescent move phase, the resistance and the obstacles to that need to be moved out of the way in order to have a full illumination of the at the full moon. This is what the crescent or waxing moon represents. And so you've already started feeling it, Cancer, in terms of your assets, in terms of what's right in front of you, and certainly what is your root system, your home, your family, those you feel loyal to and belong to and feel a sense of belonging. So the 4th house, especially for Cancer rising people, the rule of law, right? The format of relationship as a scale of balance. This is where you feel the most secure and safe, is in these intellectual and mentally identified structures of balance, justice, and fairness, right? And so the thing is that this is where the south node of the moon is. This is where karmically and at a soul unconscious level we've already been. So it's very powerful here, and you're going to have to, Cancer, be aware of the fact that those things are changing too. And if your root system is so embedded in a place where we've been and that we are moving out of, you're going to have to really embrace this tension of this first quarter moon, because the sun in your 2nd house is like, I am totally independent, right? A sense of real independence of 3 degrees of Leo, right? That you are basically reorienting your sense of personal ideal in relation to society and in resistance in a lot of ways to societal standards. Whereas the moon is going to be like, yeah, but I express myself so much in the connection, in the sharing, in the ability to come together and actually create something more than we each individually could. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you identify that who you are in relationship is already gone through a destructive and it's just coming into the tail end of it, if you already identify that at the full moon in the 8th house, you're going to have that really strong reflection of your mirror image, the negative to your positive. Scorpio is the 8th house, right? And so it's going to be, I think, a really interesting time for the Cancer identified people at this first quarter moon in Scorpio, because it's going to be a real challenge to basically identify that crisis and what has to go, right? Basically, when you get to the first quarter moon and then the week leading to the full moon, you repudiate what is not harmonizing with the growing life. So whatever means in which you have expressed yourself in the past in terms of coming together, cooperating, doing something that influence, all these people coming together to, it's like a village. It takes a village type of energy. That is 3 degrees of Scorpio to a T. But if you're building deliberately new structures and faculties in order to be able to receive and assimilate the full moon, which is going to be a reality check for all of us, you're going to have to really be willing to embrace the tension of this first quarter moon, right? The crisis in relationship. You're very identified with this asset of, your own heart fire and how it's released into the world. And the square to the moon is like, yeah, but I really express that heart fire by coming together. And it's not that in itself is negative, but where is it all going? Well, we're really being drawn to this North Node now in Aries, which is the freedom of true contribution. But as relationship land is changing and has been changing, all of this changes for Cancer. So again, being prepared for all of it burning to the ground in some ways and regrowing from the very roots. If you've ever done anything where you've cut that plant all the way down to the soil, this is what this really represents, right? The plant is not the one initiating the growth. It is the Great Spirit. It is nature. It is the natural process that God has put into place here that allows for that growth. And there's a trust that comes into that as well. So it's going to be difficult, Cancer, I assure you, and for all of us. But you got it, especially if you are a very healthy Cancer-identified person and that you understand that your sensitivity and your personal power is coming from this sense of being a nurturer, being a protector, being an insulator in many ways. And for those of you who are Procyon starseeds, this new moon is really very strong. And I'm going to go into that in just a moment because I want to share that with you. So really, the week leading up to the full moon is considerably less heavy with big transits. The next really big transit is going to be on the 27th, which is when Mercury and Venus come into conjunction with each other. And I would say that this is a great opportunity to, settle things, be able to, be able to really find peaceful settlements to disputes and negotiating and resolving conflicts, right? And of course, in the second house, it's going to be very favorable for doing business and having a good head for numbers, be confident about signing contracts, things like that. It will allow for, like I said, a appreciation of gifts or resources, and maybe that's just someone that actually is approaching you very diplomatically, wants to negotiate, wants to break down barriers to progress. I think that this is a really, Thursday 27th, there's a really good opportunity for this with this Mercury conjunct Venus. And then by the time we get to right up to the full moon, which is on the 1st, right before that on the 31st, when the moon comes into Capricorn. And then on the day of the full moon, which is the 1st, not only do we have the full moon in Aquarius, but we're also going to have Mars in a trine to Jupiter. This is very favorable in terms of getting something done, being successful in something. And in the case of the Cancer person, we're definitely looking at good fortune, increases your desire to compete to win. Any action you start will turn out to be successful. Using your initiative, acting on your desires, counting on good judgment. This is the right time for decisive action. So when there was a sense of opposition, which will be enhanced with Mercury opposite Saturn at this same time, and kind of going over what that Mars opposition really represented, because it's very serious. It can be poor self-esteem leading to communication problems and isolation, but there's a possibility of bad news, very challenging situations, especially if you've been neglectful in some way. But there's a very strong possibility you're seeing the worst in every case when this is happening. So you're not necessarily making important decisions, but you have a critical eye in this moment. And so to just be very serious about what's going on and using this opportunity to do some research on yourself. Now, Mercury is at home in Virgo and is often the ruler of the 3rd house. So that mental energy to really get down to it is going to be very powerful opposite Saturn. And as much as it might be very serious, you can actually you can actually get something done here. And then along with Mars in a trine to Jupiter, which is very favorable, again, for getting something done, and increasing any action you initiate here is going to be successful. Also in the third house, right? And so I think the Mercury opposite Saturn in this case, considering Mars had already come over to this point, the moon had come over this point already, Mercury is just going to make it that much more serious in terms of how you approach your analysis, how you approach your mental discipline, and how Mercury is functioning in this realm. And then Mars in a trine to Jupiter, right? Jupiter holding the big picture space in terms of the social networks that you're a part of. Mars is really like, this is one of the best indicators of successful effort, right? You just have to take it seriously with Mercury opposite Saturn in this point too, realizing that the meaning meaning and purpose of the relationships is very much still, your conscience is still very much here, and the energy of how you are engaging with your immediate environment is where you can do the actual work in order to come to a sense of alignment with which Saturn represents, because it's unyielding, it is restrictive, it's limiting, because it just is. It is the law. Okay, as it is unfolding in time and space. Okay. So just to take it seriously, but also to realize that, especially because there will be this awareness and culmination with the full moon in Aquarius in the 8th house. Like I said, it's going to be like a magic mirror, but you may not like what you have reflected back onto you, and you may not appreciate the reality that is being reflected back to you emotionally, as opposed to what, most people are, kind of that willful ignorance or runaway screaming, right? That's the other thing too. So by the time we get to the full moon, there is, we've gone through so much. And then by the time we get here, hopefully we've moved all these obstacles out of the way, so that when we get to this point, for the Cancer person entirely, you can be like, oh, I see now. I see how I've been projecting my own shit onto everybody as if they're a screen, or I see how others have been projecting onto me as if I am a screen. I'm finally actually able to see myself for who I am, and realize that I can project my authenticity out into the world, and it will reflect back an authentic version of myself, and certainly in terms of what you're sharing with other people. Okay. It's just going to be very serious with that Mercury opposite Saturn. So the two things that I want to share with you before we part ways here, Cancer, with this new moon forecast is, number one, I just want to talk about Procyon, because this is a fixed star that is a starseed origin, and Procyon is a star that is in the Canis Minor. It's Alpha Canis Minor in the Little Dog constellation. And there you can go to astrologyking.com. You can look up Procyon. It's also a Bohemian fixed star, and it is at the zodiac degree of 25 to 26 degrees Cancer. So there's a lot of different things about Procyon that you can look into, but the things that really stand out when it comes to this new moon, and it comes to the Sabian symbol of this new moon in Cancer, is that there is a potential to be hasty and pig-headed with this fixed star in your chart, but there also confers a willpower and ability to put thoughts and plans into action. And in fact, the Mercury square Jupiter that happened at the new moon the same day is exactly the type of transit where you have a broad picture here and you put things into action, plans and thoughts into action. So there's a tendency to a hot temper with this particular star. And so the new moon, again, is here. And enterprises created in haste do not last, but especially people who want to just bust through the wall with their head. And I'm telling you that Mars opposite Saturn is going to really amplify this. So you're only going to hurt yourself if you do that. So, but Procyon gives drive and a good sharp mind, and success is made greater if you are willing to put those thoughts and plans into action, and it's very much thought out. Okay. Procyon is also the name of the navigator of the ship Argo. That is the ship that made the voyage in search of the Golden Fleece, Jason and the Argonauts. And in my opinion, the Golden Fleece is the biofield. It is the electrical body part that extends from our cerebral spinal fluid being in alignment with the creator's frequency, being attuned to God, being attuned to natural energy, being attuned to source, allows us to have a biofield. And I think that is what the Golden Fleece is. That's just my opinion. So Procyon was the navigator, the steersman on the ship that was on the voyage to find it. So again, it's that inner sense of connectivity, that inner sense of power that is really the steering us and navigating us through the waters in order to come back to ourselves, to find our connection to source, right? And the Golden Fleece being the biofield is really how we actually not only protect ourselves, but nurture ourselves, insulate ourselves, right? And so there's a lot here about Procyon and Procyon, the energy of Procyon. But something to also keep in mind is that the star rules the left eye. And I know that that has a lot of connotations, but it's a restless and hot-tempered energy that's fast and furious, but there's also a very strong physical drive and a sharp mind. So rise and success are granted by this star, but only if patience is practiced and good judgment is exercised. So I would really advise you to embrace this. Anger issues and unresolved pain from the past are indicated if Procyon is in your chart. And Procyon starseeds have a lot of this because of what this represents. And there's a lot of very prominent black hat people that have Procyon in their chart, and prominent not black hat people, including the U.S. natal chart and the chart we're going to look at to close this out. So I just want to bring awareness to the star Procyon as a starseed origin. It rules the left eye, insight and foresight. Any enterprise created in haste is not going to last, but those who have been made with the intention of inviting in and creating a space for divine intervention or providence is going to be successful. So please, Cancer, take this initiative right now with this new moon period to put these structures into place, or at least intend to do so, and know that all the challenges surrounding all of us are going to give you opportunities to reinforce yourself as we go through the next 2 weeks. Now, the thing I want to just end on, which is why I actually now realize that I couldn't do this reading until today, is we want to look at the chart of, that's the U.S. natal chart, but we're going to look at Donald Trump's chart. And this has nothing to do with whether you support him, don't support him. That's not anything to do with this particular teachable moment here. What I am showing you is, if you see here that Venus and Saturn are conjunct at Procyon and at the same degree basically as the new moon, well, he was just indicted, right? So he has Venus and Saturn conjunct in his 11th house, right? 11th house of society, the social networks as a whole, society as a whole, the collective consciousness as a whole. He also has Mercury in Cancer, so he's a very heavy Cancer energy as well. Not only that, he has he was born at a full moon lunar eclipse, with that full moon and the eclipsed full moon and black moon Lilith all in his 4th house, which has a Scorpio cusp here. His midheaven is conjunct the Pleiades. Uranus is going to almost come to his 10th house, which is where his natal Uranus is, and station retrograde just coming up against that. So, I mean, it's not done for Donald Trump, but his indictment at the new moon, or right after the new moon, with right on Venus and Saturn conjunct, is very, very telling about a lot of things. So just to give you some insight onto what the Sun Venus conjunct Saturn in the natal chart, this is from astrology.com. So when you have this in your chart, you're someone who aspires to build structures and forms in your community that reflect your values and aesthetics. You are ambitious and willing to take on the associated responsibilities required to fulfill your goals through hard work and determined effort. So due to your capacity for overcoming obstacles with Saturn and Venus together and achieving your aspirations, it will be important to get clear about your authentic values as separate from the norms and values of your dominant culture, right? And so this new moon, I think, is really going to test him in terms of all of these things, because it's bringing it, it's initiating it, it's bringing right out. And of course, finding out that he's going to be officially indicted for January 6th at this time is initiating this particular transit in his chart, and is really going to challenge him to stay true to his ideals and what it is that he's doing. So this is not, a support or a condoning of supporting him or not supporting him. I'm just showing you in the chart and realizing that I really needed to bring this into the conversation. The other thing about this chart is that the full moon that's coming on the 1st of August is right along his Pluto axis, right? The sun will be conjunct his natal Pluto, and the full moon will be on his natal Pluto opposition, which has a lot to do with the soul's evolution in the natal chart. So and that's in the 12th house, right? The house of endings, the house of the karma coming back around. And when you have Pluto in the 12th house natally, I mean, your biggest contribution is the power that you have in terms of being able to resolve the karma, balance the accounts, right? Showing that there is power in releasing and surrendering back into source. So he's going to really have to trust this process. I'm sure he's been aware of it for a long time. This is nothing new or a surprise to him, but it's really going to challenge these abilities to create and maintain these structures, right? And just like we talked about with Procyon, anything made in haste, right? Pig-headed, hasty type of structures, they won't last. Well, he's got Saturn and Venus here conjunct, so they're really meant to last as long as he can maintain his focus and his stability in terms of what's really valuable to him at a social level. And that means he's going to really have to surrender himself fully over to the will of God's plan. And I think he's done that, right? For the most part. We're going to really see at the full moon what that means, I think, for him and for all of us and for all the Cancer identified people. So my friends, thank you for being here. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. I would offer you the lunar transit forecast, and certainly you can book it as a Cancer sun, moon, or rising person. You link it in you find it in the link to my website in the description box. You go to bookings, you find the lunar transit forecast. But I'm going to be fully honest with you, I'm not going to be able to get to it until the full moon. So if you know that you want a full moon reading and looking at the full moon and the rest of the transits, I would honor that for the Cancer sun, moon, and rising people. And if you have sun, moon, and rising in Aquarius as well, and since the full moon is in Aquarius, you can book that as well. But I'm not going to be able to get to it at least for 2 weeks, so because I'm just booked out that far at this point, and I want to honor the bookings that I already have and get to those. So, but that is an option if you are Cancer sun, moon, and rising. Of course, if you're part of the Starseed Fellowship, you're a monthly member, you can book the lunar transit forecast at the sale rate, no matter what your sign is. But it's same thing. I'm not going to get to it for at least 2 weeks. So it's going to be much more of a full moon and beyond type of reading if you do want to book the 30 or 60-minute reading. Thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate all of you so very much. Take care of yourselves, Cancer. Truly, you are our representative of this lunar cycle. And I wouldn't have it any other way, right? I mean, you are the people who know where your root system is. You are the root system in your families, in your communities. And I feel like that you will do just fine as long as you're aware of the challenges surrounding you and being very mindful that everything related to who you've been in relationship may go through a massive upset, and it's your root system and your identity that is going to determine how your new growth as an individual and how you project yourself into the world, right? And your inherent power is your voice, your authentic voice, okay? And you don't want to hold it back too long, right? Because we need you. With that being said, I'm going to thank you one more time, and I'm going to sign out. Take care, everyone. I'll see you on the Starseed Ministry on Monday the 24th. Peace out.